Briefly describe an issue that might be the focus of current or future advocacy efforts and explain why advocacy is a hallmark of professionalism in the early childhood field. Briefly, will do my best. I do feel inequitable pay in the early childhood workforce due to multi-impacted disparities is a huge issue currently in early childhood education. The issues of dire concern for early childhood education in our community, because as teachers continue in a workforce where they're not valued through compensation for their knowledge, skills, expertise, they're leaving the industry altogether to pursue careers with less stress and more pay. And when qualified teachers leave the industry, it is incredibly difficult to replace them with qualified candidates, ultimately leaving centers with no choice but to close classrooms because of an inability to stay within their state licensing ratios. Um, and in turn, displaced teachers lead to displaced care and further expand the nation's childcare deserts, and that has many negative implications that would just contribute continually to our nation's early childhood crisis. So policymakers and the general public have begun to understand more about the importance of education and the impact that it has on young child's development. So continuing to educate communities and government officials with statistical evidence surrounding low wages and the correlation with teacher burnout and a limited workforce will push informed decision making with local and federal legislatures. While there are various strategies to improve early educator compensation, such as stipends, apprenticeship, wage supplements, they're not always guaranteed or reliable income sources. So while strides are being taken to move forward through publicly funded initiatives, most of the money and the grants that are going towards those programs, it's only benefiting educators in public school systems and few other publicly funded programs such as Head Start. And there's just a large majority of other local nonprofit private centers that are not seeing this difference, that are not getting this public funding access. So while there is still a large and vast majority of care that doesn't receive it, these policies have led early childhood professionals and government officials to see that pay equity is possible. There's also an active push to increase minimum wage for all workers, not just those in early education. And while in theory it sounds wonderful for the early childhood workforce, those programs that are not publicly funded would have a financial burden on the parents to kind of compensate for those wages. So the increase in wage doesn't necessarily benefit those private sectors, those private centers, because a lot of the time that wage difference is just rolled into tuition, and ultimately the families have to pay for it. So advocacy about this topic, I feel, is very important. And it starts with educating our families and communities about the importance of early childhood education and the foundations the profession sets for all future learning and development. When educators in the profession stand up for informed advocacy to further the quality of the profession that directly impacts the care of children and families, we stand to make a difference and not just accept what always has been, but we stand to create a future for educators, for families, and for children everywhere, and to show them what early childhood really could be. But it starts with a voice. And so we have to create a very loud voice, and that just stems from educating our community. And so once we can do that, and we have other strong voices to stand in our corner, I think really positive impact can be had. And we can go to our government officials and our policymakers and say, hey, we need to reallocate some public funding. Here's why, and give them all of that information. And I think that is just critically important for our field, for us to continue to have doors remain open and have quality care continue to increase in quality.